House of Horrors with Formal Dining and Used Brick is the fifth episode of the fifth season of Cheers, directed, of course, by the wonderful James Burrows. And there will be spoilers from now as I talk about this episode. And this is actually a really emotional episode, not because it's emotional, it's not a heavy episode, but because there are things that happen in this that are just so beautiful to witness. When you build up a relationship with certain characters, and then we get to see certain things happening. It's just so wonderful. So as I said, there will be spoilers from now, and the opening scene starts off quite light-hearted. We have Norm, Cliff, Frasier and Woody looking at a newspaper article about Loch Ness Monster, and Woody decides they're going to go and pack a picnic and view it. And needless to say, that's not exactly how things are going to work out. It's a fun way to start things off. The rest of the episode is pretty much all about Carla and Cliff. We have a tiny bit of Sam and Diane, which I'll get to in a second, but mostly it's Carla and Cliff, which I absolutely love. Norm asks Carla how the house hunting is going, and she responds by stuffing his tie in his mouth. Clearly things aren't going very well. Diane then comes into Cheers, and she tells Sam that she's free that evening, but Sam is actually already going out with a woman called Tiffany. Diane describes Tiffany, and I think it's really interesting that when Diane leaves the area, Sam responds by calling off the date with Tiffany. And he does this because Diane describes her perfectly as being somebody who's all about her appearance and not very intelligent. And my understanding, or the way I read this, is that Sam has called this off because he doesn't want Diane to see him dating somebody who, in his words, doesn't have a brain. And I don't think he's looking for somebody to date with a brain because he wants to date somebody who will give him stimulating conversation. I think that might be part of it. We have seen Sam growing in a lot of those ways over the last few seasons, but I think it's mostly because he wants to show Diane that he can date smart, intelligent women. She's not the only intelligent person for him, and I think that that's really telling that he's still very much caught up on Diane's opinion of him. Cliff then comes in and tells Carla about a house that's on his route, and it turns out the house is in a nice area, but it's within her price range. And her horoscope had told her to take a chance and explore other avenues, so she decides to check out the house. Cut immediately to the next scene, she comes in all excited, a very unusual expression for Carla to have. She doesn't really express excitement very much, so it's nice to see her being really enthusiastic about something. And it turns out she bought the house, and Sam prompts her to say thank you to Cliff, and we have this scene that I absolutely love where she approaches Cliff from behind and tells Cliff to not turn around and to look at the floor, and she does say thank you to him, and it's a really, really lovely moment. We then have another little bit between Sam and Diane, and this is the last thing about Sam and Diane for this episode I'm going to mention, but we have this great bit where Sam is looking through his book trying to find somebody else to date, and Diane says, "I see the search for intelligent life continues." And Sam replies, "Do you mind? You're in my light." And Diane's response is just so golden. I absolutely love it. Without missing a beat, she says, "I am your light," which I just thought was so sweet and very, very funny. So I like that over the last few episodes, we've had little nuggets of interactions between Sam and Diane, helping us to see the state of their relationship at present time without putting too much focus on it and allowing us to have more attention paid to other characters and other stories. Norm then comes in, and Carla is not in the area, and Norm reveals that he found out the house is actually built over the graveyard of a 17th century prison. And they know Carla is very suspicious, and Cliff begins to panic because he's just encouraged Carla to buy a house on a graveyard. And of course he's very worried about this, but people say that they should tell her it's the right thing to do, as Norm points out, and I quote, and this irritated me so much, and it will irritate other people as well, and I quote, "It's always dangerous to mess with Carla, especially when she's happy. It's like when Frankenstein was playing with the little girl." I love Norm, but referring to Frankenstein's creature as Frankenstein is bordering on unforgivable in my books. Really, really irritated me, but I love Norm, so I will try and let it slide. They tell Carla, and she pretends it's okay. But then as she walks away, She looks concerned. We have some ominous music. Cut to the next scene, and the rest of the episode plays out in the house, and she enters it holding up a cross, and she's determined to spend the night there. And if she can do that, the house isn't going to affect her. And I think that's a great way to approach it. The one thing that I will say that doesn't make tremendous sense about this part of the episode is that there is electricity, and there is a lamp on at one point. But if she was scared, why didn't she put the big light on? Maybe it's just me, but I feel like one of the first things you do when you move into a new house or are planning on moving in is not to bring a lamp. Granted, the lamp might have been left there, but it's to put a bulb in the big light overhead. And I feel like that would have made it less scary to spend the night there, so you're not in the dark. And also, it would have been a little bit better to look at because it is quite a dimly lit scene or series of scenes. But obviously I know what they were going for by turning the lights down. It made it a little bit more suspenseful. But just as something that I did raise an eyebrow at, if I was spending my night alone in a house that I thought was going to be haunted, I would absolutely put the big light on. So that for me was a bit of an oversight, but I can understand why they made the decision to keep the lights down. Carla is there on her own, and then Norm and Cliff turn up. Norm has a pizza with him. It's really great. Cliff is being really supportive. Cliff has so many great things to say in this episode, which I absolutely love. Unfortunately, Vera calls Cheers, and then Sam ends up calling at Carla's house to tell Norm to come home. And again, if you've moved in long enough to have the phone hooked up, I feel like you would have put the light bulbs in the big lights at that point. So that's something else. That's actually the point where I raised an eyebrow at the lights, because up until that point, I hadn't clocked any lamps or anything turned on. But when the phone was plugged in and turned on, I thought, well, if you've had your phone connected, you're going to have bulbs in the big lights. But I'll move on from that point. I won't think about it too much. Norm goes home, and it's just Cliff and Carla. And they're sitting on the floor eating the pizza, and they have a really nice, I don't want to say heart-to-heart, that's taking it a step too far, but they have a really nice conversation, and we have so much growth for Carla in this episode. Growth in two ways. Growth in terms of her quality of life. She's bought a house. It's a bigger property. As she mentioned, it's got a yard. She has grass now. So that's her feeling like she's stepping up in the world, which is wonderful. But I feel like she's also growing as a person because she can not only tolerate Cliff, but I feel like there are bits of this episode where she actually almost enjoys his company, which is so lovely to see. She is still being a little bit mean to him. She tells him there's no reason for you to be here. And after a few not so pleasant words, Cliff says, fine, if you don't want me here, I'll leave. He's about to leave, and Carla tells him to wait. And I think that is so, so telling of how she is maturing and growing as a person. And she teaches him to dance. This is relevant because a little bit before that we find out that Cliff never had anybody to practice dancing with, and they have the radio on, and she teaches him to dance, and Cliff is obviously very awkward, and she actually tells him to move a little closer to her. Not in any kind of flirtatious sexual way, that's absolutely not what I'm getting from this, but there was a huge gap between them, and if she was going to teach him to dance, he would need to move closer. And the fact that Carla encouraged that, I thought was just so wonderful. And it's so emotional to see these characters going through these changes and personal developments. And it's just so beautiful. They wake up the following morning with Carla resting on Cliff's leg, which is not something she did intentionally, but it's kind of where she ended up, and I just thought that was so beautiful to see. And she's so excited because she's made it through the night. The spell is broken. She's so happy. She hugged and kissed Cliff. She just kissed him on the cheek. I think it wasn't, there's nothing passionate about it. But again, this is just so fabulous. And then things get intense for a moment as we see this very bright light hurtling, growing closer and closer to the house with this horrendous noise. And initially I thought, it's like a garbage truck or something, but it gets bigger and louder. And Carla leaps into Cliff's arms. And I was waiting for the moment for her to kind of jump free of his arms repulsed and say something nasty to him. But she never does. All she does is celebrate the fact that it's an aeroplane because Cliff explains that it's an aeroplane, and he shares some knowledge about it, as Cliff would do. And she's just so relieved that her house isn't haunted. The reason it's cheap is because it's on the end of a runway. And I love it. And I feel like she probably should have realised that. I feel like if your house was on the end of the runway, you'd probably be aware of that. But nevertheless, it's not something she noticed. And she doesn't say anything nasty to Cliff. She's just happy. She's relieved. And it's beautiful. And I just get so emotional watching this episode because it's so wonderful to see these characters behaving like that. And I love them. I mean, I love all of the characters, but it's so fabulous and just a really brilliant episode. Needless to say, House of Horrors with formal dining and used brick is a fantastic episode, and one that I hold very close to my heart.